Hello and welcome to Consortium More Than Marketing's podcast. I'm delighted today to be joined by Adele from Cullimore Dutton. We are the reason we've got Adele on the show. In fact, I asked her to join us. They've got quite a unique business model, I think, in the legal sector, particularly given the size of the firm. But Adele's probably best to introduce herself than me. So we're going to dive into today talking a little bit about the firm, the journey that Adele's been on, some of the sort of key learnings they've had over their journey to where they currently are today. Adele, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, lovely. So I'm Adele Bebbington-Plant. I'm director at Cullimore Dutton, and I'm a solicitor with sort of 20 years experience in the wills, probate, trusts, powers of attorney sector. But my most recent role, I'm head of our private client section of the business and business development director.
Yeah, which I love that. I love the fact that a firm has got a business development director. As you know, it's a passion of mine. Before we came online, we were just chatting through the structure of the firm. I think it would be really useful for the listeners if you don't mind going into a bit about the fact, you've got a couple of people on the board that aren't actually lawyers, heaven forbid, and maybe have had non-conventional routes to ending up where they currently are. Do you want to talk us through that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, if I start off with myself, so I joined the business 20 years ago to just help after law college and get a little bit of work experience. So I came to do 2 weeks secretarial cover in our property team. Um, 20 years on, I think I've had just about every role in the business. So, a secretary, trainee solicitor, associate solicitor, head of a department, head of a growing sort of area of the business, and then director. Um, but in general, lots of us on the board of directors have had a similar route in. So Steve Roberts joined the business a similar time to myself. And Steve was our IT support for years, but over time has really grown. And he's responsible for our operations. So he's our ops director. He now covers more sort of strategic the IT projects. He's responsible for lots of budgeting and lots of contracts and things that we have. So any sort of big projects we have, Steve would lead on things like updating payment systems and updating our IT systems, those kinds of things. Our CEO and owner of the business, Andy, he'll joke himself. So he joined just as I was going off on maternity leave with my twin boys. And he, in his words, came to do a little bit of marketing. And 9 years on, as I say, he's CEO and owner of the business. Sarah Davis as our MD. She joined as a solicitor in the property team and is now MD. So we've all grown and we've all sort of really progressed our careers here and been supported to progress our careers here. And so I would say that's one thing that makes us perhaps unique. We're really passionate about people getting to where they want to be. I came back from a period of ill health. I had breast cancer a few years ago. And Louise Holmes had joined our wills and probate team, which I was head of at the time. And I saw real potential in Louise and wanted her to head up that team. So for a while, I sort of sidestepped and for her to take the lead. And we're not precious about doing that. We're really, as I say, we're passionate about getting behind people. So on our board of directors, we have myself as business development lead. We have Sarah Davis, who heads up property and MD. We have Stuart, who heads up risk, and Brenda Spain, who heads up client experience and client service. All of us are solicitors, but Steve and Andy on the board of directors are not solicitors, and I think it brings a really different dimension. Andy especially, I would say, has some genuinely inspired ideas. He brings a real different business acumen to the table, which is incredibly valuable. So things like we have a vision of changing lives, the lives of our clients, colleagues, and community for the better. So for our colleagues, a lot of that's about our career pathway and getting them to where they want to be. Our clients, exceptional service. We want to give exceptional service. We want to build long-lasting relationships. Hopefully we change their lives through that on a daily basis. But then we also looked at the wider community. So we do, we have links with charities. We sponsor Story House, which is a local theatre library. We sponsor Chester Rugby Club. And we have a sister business called Inspire. And we set that up to sort of bring together and celebrate the best of local businesses and professionals. So there's a monthly magazine that sort of takes them on a platform to a wider community, but we also hold networking lunches and events. And I think without Andy's input, we wouldn't have had something along those lines. But in terms of collaboration in the city, I think it's stronger than it's ever been in the 20 years I've known it. But also when I'm in meetings, or, you know, in team meetings, etc., I'm really encouraging our people to not only sort of deliver the brand Cullimore Dutton, but to develop their own brand, because I think that's in their best interest.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of this is like music to my ears, really. Like you, top of the class, Adele. What's probably of interest to the listeners if they don't know Cullimore Dutton, or if from what you've said they're assuming that you're some massive top 100 firm, it is the fact that you're just 55 people in size. So. What might be of interest if you're able to share is kind of how do you have so many roles that presumably aren't heavily fee earning when you're a relatively lean firm?
So we, myself, Brenda, Sarah, and Stuart, we do still do some fee earning. Andy and Steve obviously don't fee earn, but I think we have a couple of aspects to the business that set us apart. So we have in-house independent financial advisors, and we've had, with the amalgamation of two firms, and one of those firms was Birch Cullimore, and they had an IFA in situ. He's still with us today, 30 years on. And so we have a bit of a different business model. We're one of only a handful of firms that can provide that independent financial advice as well. So we have a slightly different business model in that we have some regular income. But also one of my sort of, I think one of my changing points in terms of the way we led our wills and probate team was when I actually took a bit of a step back from fee earning. One of the books that I will mention at the end is Dan Warburton, and he talks about the power of delegation. And so when you're sat and you're fee earning yourself, you're not working on the business, you're not necessarily going out there winning work. And so, you're fairly limited as one person. Whereas when you sort of delegate and you're sort of sharing the work around and making use of efficiencies, you can very quickly make some economies of scale. So whilst we have fee earning roles as directors, they're not necessarily the strongest fee earning roles in the business. But that's okay, and we really champion our fee earners.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to go about it. So, obviously, it's been an interesting couple of years for law firms post pandemic. I think, I don't know, from an external perspective, it's probably been a lot better than maybe firms had anticipated, particularly during the pandemic. What do you think the challenges for, I mean, most of you are about to go into your next or are in your next financial year. What do you think the challenges 2025/26 have for you?
Gosh, okay. I mean, where do you start in the current climate that we're in? It's quite a bizarre climate, isn't it? I think the pandemic had real ripple effects. So we're a very niche private client business. We offer wills and probate, trusts, tax planning, and sort of powers of attorney in that area. We have our independent financial advisors. We dovetail very closely with them. we have family lawyers, and then we have our property team. Property is mainly residential, but we have a commercial area that supports those private clients. During the pandemic, I don't think you would find many property lawyers who weren't just rocked to the core. Stamp duty holiday, no stamp duty holiday, the deadlines for them were just crazy. And I think we've got similar going on again at the minute with the stamp duty. Rachel Reeves has really run a road through your inheritance tax savings on business property relief, agricultural property relief. So I see lots of work in the near future in that inheritance tax planning and making sure that business owners, farmers are really well equipped to navigate the future. Because it's going to be a very different inheritance tax landscape. And as I say, we work very closely with our IFAs and with other local businesses to make sure that we dovetail that advice, because you want to make sure that the advice you're giving is the best in from every angle possible. So I think there are going to be challenges ahead. National insurance, I mean, for businesses, that is huge, really huge. One of the things that was really interesting, our wills and probate team yesterday went out to a step conference, and Sarah Gill came back to me and she said, I get it. We've had this lecture on national insurance. I get it. I get why you were talking to us about why we're not a stack it high and sell it cheap business, why we want to pride ourselves on relationships, do a good job for the right price. And she's like, it all makes sense. I understand this about the national insurance and what you're saying to us. So lots of challenges, but I think with those challenges, for the right people developing relationships with clients, I think there will be opportunities for business.
I think that's always the way to look at it, isn't it? I know we've found since the pandemic, or pre-pandemic, we would do 12-month marketing plans. I just don't think there's any point in doing that anymore. No. So we operate
quarter by quarter.
Yeah, 90-day sprints, where you can be agile, because like you say, almost all of the things you've just listed, if we'd talked about it a year ago, we wouldn't have seen any of them happening. So it's all about being agile. I think
that's been my go-to word in virtually every directors meeting we've had. We're a small business, we need to be agile, we need to be able to react, not necessarily be reactive, but we need to be able to sort of react to the way that the market is.
I think it's one of your probably greatest strengths as well, being the size that you are. And unfortunately it doesn't always translate. Sometimes small firms do still take a very long time to react and make decisions, but the fact that you've structured yourself how you are, I quite often refer to a law firm as like a tanker when it comes to a boat, because they just take so long to change direction and change what they're doing, whereas you're probably more like a little speedboat or a yacht, and able to navigate and change more quickly, which has got to be the advantage of size, but also your structure, where you've got a small leadership team that can just make decisions and are empowered to make decisions and move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things that we've been talking about recently is our career pathways and the sort of what we're asking our staff to do. We're very much explaining at the minute that the market is changing rapidly, and we need to be able to be agile and change our plans. So in our career pathways, we're talking about 90-day goals, aims, objectives. Similarly, at director level, our business development plan, we're looking at quarter one. As you say, in the past, we'd have been looking at a year. But I just don't think that's the right way to go at the minute.
It's interesting what you're just saying about we're talking about 90-day plans and onboarding. So I know off air we talked about how you're not necessarily a lover of the podcast yet.
No,
See if we can
no.
convert you. But
Yeah.
I think it's Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO, actually his audio book as opposed to his podcast. But they have, this kind of ties in quite nicely. There was a conference this week as well about people, because ultimately I think in law most of your business is about people, and onboarding and the success, how well you successfully onboard team members. And he talks about a 90-day onboarding, which actually is probably a really good idea, because I think a lot of us, and definitely the law firms that were at this conference, do it in a week. You've got
Really?
well, you've been inducted, and
Yes, okay.
thereafter, you might have monthly check-ins, but actually nobody is mapping out a full 90 days of what that looks like. I mean, maybe you guys do.
Okay, that's really interesting, because we are pretty hot on our inductions, and we would have at least the first 2 weeks mapped out, and then we would be having sort of two weekly check-ins with really firm objectives. So we do try and map out, but we've also developed things like ways of working handbooks for different teams, so that when people come into a team, that's the Cullimore Dutton way of doing something, and to try and have that uniformity of approach, I think delivers sort of a more aligned approach from a client perspective, but actually it helps if everybody on the team is doing things in a similar way, because it doesn't matter then who you ask. And one of the things that Louise and I find helpful, Louise is part-time, so on the days when she's not in, there's no sort of ego as to who's asked a question, because they're going to get a similar answer. And on the days that they don't, well, that doesn't matter.
It's consistency, isn't it? Because I think consistency is so important for trust as well, from staff and from potential clients and prospects. So one of the things I quite often talk to our guest speakers about is, obviously we touched on it a little bit earlier, but what would you say the top 3 areas for focus for Cullimore Dutton in the next year is?
Okay, so we're working really heavily on business development. We've invested heavily into our wills and probate team, so we've taken on additional members, similarly in our family team. So it's about growth in those areas. So business development. I've also done quite a lot of work on internal referrals, and how it's really important to clients to make sure that they have that consultative and holistic approach of advice. So BD, in whatever guise that comes, networking, and then we're looking at strategic growth, perhaps acquisition of another business, or acquisition of premises in a different location.
Do you know what? People are going to think I've paid you to come on, because all of the things you've talked about are BD or marketing related, which is great, because actually I think probably the last 4 or 5 guests we've had on have all talked about IT being the number one challenge, and people.
Yeah, and people are always going to be a challenge, aren't they? Because we all have life that happens, so there are always going to be the recruitment challenges, etc., from time to time. But I feel like we've come a long way, and I would say in wills and probate, we've got the best team that I've ever known in my 20 years. I'm really proud of that team. And again, in family, we've grown. We've got more people in property. We've now got 4 strong team in the IFAs, and we feel like we're in a good place people wise. There's always going to be the odd curveball thrown, isn't there? But I feel like we're in a good place. And then the other real objective we have, now that we've got the people, it's client service, because that's going to drive our BD as well. There's no point bringing in the work if you're not servicing it properly.
100%. But I think that's also indicative of the roles that you've given the board. So with having Steve looking at IT, I'm sure if we spoke to him, he'd probably talk about some IT projects.
Absolutely.
But with you being responsible for BD, your sole focus, other than the client work you've got to do, is the business development. And I think, did you say Sarah's responsible
So Sarah, as MD, is responsible for the day-to-day management. One of the things that we find, or one of our challenges we find actually, is that we will sit in a meeting and we will agree what we're going to do, and everybody will go and deliver it slightly differently. And so one of the ways we've looked at recently is about actually, okay, yes, that's what we're going to go away and do, but how? And then we're starting to make sure we agree a how, because some things, okay, it's just an email, but things get lost in emails. So other things, it's about going, sitting, engaging with teams and making sure that messages are really delivered in a way that people can engage with them.
Do you know what I learnt today from my COO? He said you have to tell someone something 7 times for them to, sometimes you have to tell someone something 7 times for them to understand it, which literally blew my mind. I kind of love it, but at the same time, I'm like, why can't they understand it after the first time?
Why can't they understand it the first time? But experience would tell me they don't.
They don't. And actually, once you understand that there's a science behind it, which I'm sure there is with the 7 times, then it makes it okay. And you go, actually, do you know what? And if somebody who does get it quicker says, oh, for God's sake, we've heard this before, you can then say, that's fine. But some people need to hear it 7 times before it goes in. So it's just, I thought it was a really nice way of removing any blame, you know, because sometimes you can feel like, oh God, I need this explaining again. But actually, if you normalise it,
I'm taking that back to our SMT next week.
You can have that one, Adele. I love chatting about all these things with you, but I'm conscious of time and I try and keep these to 20 minutes for our listeners. So to wrap up, I know you don't have a podcast recommendation, but as you know, off air, my challenge to you is to embrace the podcast and maybe try some.
Yeah.
So from a business book perspective, do you have any of those up your sleeve you'd like to suggest?
So I do. I have a book by Dan Warburton, and I think Rachel has worked with Dan Warburton, and his book is Delegate Now to Supercharge Profits. And I would say that was the turning point for me in terms of growing a team. It was that delegation, the setting boundaries, and just learning how to set boundaries. I want to be involved. I want to be involved with the clients. I want to be involved with the team. But sometimes you just need to say no, or to say, please, could you go away, just give it a go and come back to me in X date. And for me, I found that pretty revolutionary.
It's funny, isn't it? I think sometimes the best business books or podcasts are things that they're actually quite simple in their principle. And logically, you know it. You know that's what you're meant to do. But sometimes by reading a book by somebody else or listening to a podcast by somebody else, it just reinforces. It's probably that 7 times thing again.
Yes.
Of hearing it again, hearing it from a different source, having seen it work somewhere else potentially, and go, oh, actually, yeah, that is. I think we're just so busy. There's so many distractions and noise from different directions that it's like, where do you even start and where do you go? Thank you so much for joining us today, Adele.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I hope our listeners have enjoyed our talk. Obviously, do reach out to Adele. I'm sure she'd love to talk more on the topic with anyone that's interested. And if you would like to listen to any of our other editions, do go on and have a listen. Equally, if you think you have a fabulous topic you would like to join us as a guest to speak about, please get in touch with me. But for now, enjoy the rest of your days.